Um, at the Black Alliance for Just Immigration, every once in a while we do dialogues between African American citizens and black migrants. And at one of the dialogues I attended, some of the African Americans there, felt this sense of kind of like, well, at least you guys have a homeland. And I certainly understand that. But like Kamika said, it's so complicated. Because, the African continent was broken. I mean, it was, our countries are not our countries, you know what I mean? Like, there are so many different ethnicities and different groups in each African country that it's extremely hard to say that it was our own, which is why I say that, this process is continuing. But I have to agree with Alan that, we find our home in ourselves, and we have to stop allowing the system to legitimize our humanity. We have to find that humanity in ourselves, and that's always been the way. So.
Home is where the heart is, and home is where the revolution is at. At least if you're trying to do that. If not, then you're gonna have to find a different home. But like at this point, like we don't have land. We don't have land all over the world. It doesn't belong to us. So where are we from? Multiple places, no place. Like it's where, for me, it's just home is where it's complicated. It's more now at this point for Black people. It's just more in the imaginary. Like it's like in that sense of belonging, right? When I went back to Jamaica, it was crazy because people were just like, "Where are you from?" And I was like, "I'm from Trinidad," because my accent is so crappy. So they were just like, "Where are you from?" Right? And I mean, growing up illegalized and like now having a green card and being able to travel to then hear people who you imagine being a part of a community like with to ask you where you're from. And then to hear your non-Jamaican accent, right? And say, oh, you're from America. Like, what does that mean for where I'm from? Because America has said that, like, I thought America said it doesn't want me. And I then realized that Jamaica also doesn't want me. But really, what it means is that I belong in both places. It's just that the way I belong, I don't like it, right? But that doesn't mean that I don't belong here. Like, African Americans, Black immigrants, Black people, we very much belong here because we built this. Like, and so we just don't like how we belong, but we belong here. Like, we belong in a very exclusionary way that always have us yearning for something else. But the thing with nationality, I'm so over it because, like, we don't got land nowhere. So until we get free and take back the land and take back our lives, I'm not really into the conversations about like what is your nationality. Like I am when I'm thinking about the state, but that's basically it.
Is that question over?
Yeah.
I'm sorry I forgot your name, but I was wondering if if you could talk more about the trans women in detention centers.
Yeah.
And the work that you're doing.
So what's going on right now is, I'm looking at my phone because I asked somebody to text. Okay, so we have had a flight of trans and queer folk in detention centers, right? They've always been there. And what's happening right now is that so there was a report that came out a few days ago. But the report happened because in Arizona and in California, there have been a few organizations that are only working for like trans liberation, right? So that means that they've been going to the detention centers on a daily basis to see what's going on and hearing the stories. And what we've noticed is that nonprofits and pro bono lawyers have only been taking cases of trans folk that they feel that have been that are easy cases because they've been good citizens and good immigrants, right? And what they weren't taking were trans folk who had criminal records for, let's say, violence in the street, right, for fighting back or something, because as undocumented people, they have no rights in the US. So it's not like them saying, oh, this was for my own security. They're gonna protect the citizen before an undocumented person, right? They were arresting trans women who were getting underground silicone injections because the medical industrial complex does not allow trans folk to transition, right? So they were going under the table and getting injections. So they were arresting those folk. They were arresting in New York, especially. I lived in New York for a little bit, when they had their condom law, whereas if you carried more than one condom and you were stopped by the police, you were considered a sex worker. So they were funneling trans women into jails and detention centers at massive rates because they were carrying more than one condom. So what's happening right now is that recently there's this trans woman, Cristina Lopez, I believe. Let me just check. Yeah, Cristina Lopez, who had been in detention for years. She's from Guatemala, and she had 3 DUIs, and nobody wanted to take her case. And my friend Isa, who is the director of programs at the Transgender Law Center in California, had to beg a lot of her friends. And eventually a lawyer took on the case, and it was like a 2-year battle, right? And we were able to release her. And after her experiences, she was one of the people featured in a documentary from the Human Rights Watch, was that, you know, the rates of solitary confinement are crazy. I currently have a lot of friends in detention. One of my friends, Valeria, she has been in a high facility jail in Orange County for a year and about 3 months. She's been in solitary confinement for almost 6 months. And that is because she's trans. And a lot of the times, what guards say to these trans women is that it's their fault that they're in solitary because they don't want to comply and they are men. And this is when male privilege is really like a conversation we need to have, because trans men are also isolated and marginalized, but not at the level that trans women are. And what's also happening is that immigration right now, I don't know if y'all saw when Jenny Gutierrez, the now known as the Obama heckler, interrupted Obama, right? Prior to the interruption, I think, especially with the conversations that I've had with, like Jenny said, who's also in the steering committee of Familia, is that people weren't paying attention to what trans men were going under. And after she interrupted Obama, Obama like had a immigration came out with a statement that they were not going to hold trans women in male detention centers, and that has not been applied yet. But what has happened is that Jenny said has opened up a conversation for people to talk about trans rights as a global issue and not just as a geopolitical issue, which is really important. And I think that still trans folk are still the most marginalized, because trans folk obviously no access to healthcare, no access to homes, discrimination at work, and trans folk are more vulnerable to join the sex trade voluntarily or involuntarily. They are more vulnerable to join the drug trade voluntarily or involuntarily, and they are more vulnerable to deaths. And the average life of a transgender Black person is under 36 years old. So that really says something about the political movement that we're at with the trans and gender nonconforming community.
You had a question?
I did. Well, first, thank you each so much for talking so courageous and poised. It's been really rewarding from an audience perspective. But also I wanted to ask, how can I or other white people stand in solidarity? What does that mean? If the system is going to listen to my voice because I look like I fit, then is there a role for a liaison? Is a sort of translation, is that always an act of violence in certain ways? Because it wouldn't be speaking from my lived experience, because I've been fortunate not to have so many institutional obstacles against me. So I suppose, like, how could my role or people like me contribute, or at least pay tribute to the incredible fights and movements that you're pushing forward?
Well, I mean, you know, privilege is an interesting thing, right? Because we all have some, and we all lack it in different spaces. You know, before this this panel, I was talking to Gustavo about how, like, in upstate New York, where I am, I work mostly with undocumented farm workers, and in that space, I'm the privileged one. So I step back and I listen. You know, that's what I do. I mean, you just have to, first of all, really try to listen to folks whose experiences you haven't lived in, and then help them find their own leadership leadership qualities, you know, and I was talking to Gustavo about how when I first started to do this organizing, I myself, who had done organizing on other issues, like there was this temptation for me to just take over, you know, for me to just simply sort of like do the work. And I realized how egocentric I was becoming and how I needed to actually step back. And once I actually stepped back and really, we did some intense like listening sessions with the farm workers. We helped them identify what they wanted. And at that point, they took off. Like, they did all of the work, and we got to sort of stand back and watch them become the leaders in their own life. So that's how you're an ally in whatever movement that you want to be a part of, I think.
You talking about privilege?
I guess
What allies can do to help.
Yeah, I mean, I do also just want to point out that we will be sharing the website for the fund. And so I think a very direct way of showing that solidarity is by donating to the fund, which was also already stated. So I don't know if you all want to pick that question up a little bit more.
Privilege?
Or how can white people stand in solidarity with
So,
black people and the activism?
from my experience, I can just share some of what I've seen and what I would like to see more of. Just like white Hampshire students building a protective chain around black students. When we were organizing in Springfield and Holyoke after we came back from Ferguson, October, against, you know, the police. I think that's a good way because it really worked, which is the whole point. Like, as soon as the cops realized what was happening, they backed off because they weren't about to do anything with white kids there. So, I think understanding where you are in this system and how you are embedded is like the first step to knowing how to be in solidarity with other people. Because I think for like the whole POC community and the conversation of like POCs being pitted against each other, it's like at the end of the day, the small incentives and the small privileges that you have are never going to lead to freedom if you keep banking on those privileges, right? And so it's like understanding like, okay, well, I'm cis, right? So is that supposed to mean that I'm not supposed to care about like trans people? Like, how is that gonna get me? Like, even from a practical self-interested point of like stance. If like when you start to understand how you're embedded and like the privileges that you have and like the fact that other people are dying because of something that they don't have, and you understand the privileges that you don't have, right? And on top of that, once you realize that this is all a whole, right? Like that this is like this is a holistic system that needs every single part to work. You start understanding that the privileges that you have, you need to start working with people who don't have those privileges to protect them and to lift them up, because that is going to liberate you, right? So like basically for someone like me, like I could talk for years about immigration, but it's like there's no liberation if I'm not talking about trans folk. Like, because I understand like what's happening, like, you know? And so I feel like maybe that could be applied for white people. Like once you know like how you're embedded, right? And how you gain privileges from people of color dying, right? Like then you know what to do. Like then it's your duty to understand that you're supposed to be in Holyoke and Springfield when the black kids say we're going to Holyoke and Springfield. You're supposed to put your body on the line because you already know what's gonna happen. They're not gonna shoot you. Like, they're not. And so it's like, once you understand how the game is played, then you can understand how you can best, like, serve the people who are marginalized. Another, like, example is of, like, immigrant youths in New Jersey, like we have conversations about, like, who's taking a risk, right? So, like, you know, they're second generation, like, youths who, like, their parents are illegalized, right? Like, they live in mixed status households, but they're born here, right? So based on just like that legal status, that's a privilege, right? And so what do? They're like, okay, like, that means that when, like, if people are taking arrests, we need to be the first people to take arrests, because even though, like, we're all, like, of color, and, like, you know, like, we basically literally can all be illegal right now, because that's how, like, brown people and black people are racialized in some ways, or in that moment, like, even though they're gonna target all of us, like, we all know that there's a two-tier racial situation there. There's a racial situation based on what we all look like, which is that at that moment we're all at risk. And then the other racial situation is about the legal paperwork. So the people with the legal paperwork know that like they need to protect the people who don't have paperwork, because like them getting arrested protects us because they're citizens. So it's just examples I have of people doing that in different ways. Another example I can think of is like light-skinned people under like slavery, white passing light-skinned people, like sometimes like they would like go off with like maybe like a dark-skinned like black person, right? And then like they'll get stopped by white people, and they're pretending to be white, right? And then the person is just like, oh, but like, why would your master like allow you to like go out with him? Like he trusts this guy. And then she was like, yeah, he trusts him. But really it was two black people, and then they were just like, but she, like the person, because she's white passing, functions as like, uses the fact that she has privilege through her color to like help not only liberate herself, but to liberate that dark-skinned person, because in that moment they're thinking, oh, like, that's her slave, right? And so it's like people have been, like, once people understand, okay, well, this is how it works, then, like, the best thing to do after that is to find ways to counteract it. Like, oh, like, this ticket costs $10, oh, I'm gonna use it, I'm gonna give it to somebody else. Just find ways to get over on the system, because it's the best feeling. And that's all I could think of for, like, how to be in solidarity.
Okay, so Ali, you talked about how like the system isn't broken, how it's made to work against us as people of color, and I guess like I'm curious about, do you think we'll be able to ever break the system? Because I feel like as a person of color who does all this work and sees all this work being done, that's so important, and you see all this progress, but then you step back and you see that there's still so much to be done, and it's kind of discouraging and daunting to look at that. There's still so many problems that need to be handled. So I guess, like, do you think that we'll be able to crack or break the system during our lifetimes, or, you know, just what your thoughts on that?
I have no idea. I mean, honestly, you know, I think of activism and organizing as this process that continues, and I don't see. I don't want to say that I don't think about consequences in organizing, but what I would say is that I'm not so much concerned about fixing everything, you know. I think that the work that I do is connected to the work that people did before I was here, and it's connected to the work that people are going to do after I'm gone, and that it's a little bit self-absorbed for me to think about ultimately fixing it all, you know, and I'm constantly surrounding myself with folks who are of that spirit. You know, I'm thinking of a friend of mine, Mariam Kaba, who is this amazing prison abolitionist in New York City, and she's done work on prison abolition for you know, many years. As you can tell, there's still a lot of work. She's one of the most optimistic people that I know, because she sees every organizing campaign as an area of practice, as an experiment, as something that you try, you know. And whether or not the campaign succeeds or not, at the end of the campaign, you know, her attitude is always, okay, what did we learn? And how can we use what we learned to move forward? And I think that's a humble and healthy way of thinking about activism and organizing, is we don't know, like, when all of these, I mean, you know, apartheid, died away, and there's still a lot of work to do because of neo-colonialism. I mean, we don't know when the big moments are going to happen. All that we know is, get free or die trying, right? Like, it's one of those things where, like, are you just going to give up? Are you going to accept that the world is the way that it is? Or are you going to do your small part, And I'm all about people doing their small part. And don't get too concerned about sort of the long run stuff, because I think that the long run big changes, that's out of our control, I think, as individual organizers. So I have a lot of hope, but it's not based on my own efforts. It's because I'm connected to amazing people like this and to amazing organizers across the country, and because I also, in many ways, try to spiritually connect myself to the people who were there before me, and I put out my positive thoughts to the people who are going to be here and doing amazing work when I'm gone. I'm just a part of the river, so. Yeah.
Just want to add tiny bit things to that. Yes, the system is working just as it was intended, right? But we're making ruptures, and that's what needs to be important. What needs to be recognized. And my mentor, she has a little tattoo of a lowercase r, and she says, "This is for all the little revolutions in my life," right? And I think we need to concentrate on those smaller revolutions, and we also need to concentrate on the larger revolution. But those are the ruptures that we're making through organizing and community outreach.
And I just want to add that every time we make a rupture, the system responds, right?
Mhm.
So the 60s happened, and now generation or so later, whatever, the system is it built up, right, in response to what was happening. And I feel like we should always expect the system to respond and to respond strongly to any type of revolt that we trying to make. So we need to anticipate that. The prison, for example, the prison abolition movement, right? We need to expect a backlash. Black Lives Matter need to expect a backlash, but we also need to also ask the question what next is going to be planned, right? How is this going to be reproduced in a different system, right? Because there are some patterns to certain things, and the details look different, but we know that there's a pattern to it, right? So they have preemptive strikes, they neutralize and assimilate and absorb in, bring them in and sanitize them, so you have Obama and not Malcolm X. There's always ways in which the enemy knows how to respond, and so I think that as long as we keep those things in consideration, and we just do what we have to do. They're going to do what they have to do, and we're going to do what we have to do. That's literally it, because that's just the life that we've been given, and it's a beautiful life to struggle. You learn so much. It sucks, but you learn a lot.
So the last